Welcome to the Wolves and Sheep podcast. I'm Roberta Glass, and I'm going to be talking to you about how serial podcasts will possibly free the convicted killer, Adnan Syed. So, when we talk about the Adnan Syed case, he was convicted of murdering Hae Min Lee in 2000. We like to talk about little pieces of evidence here and there. Especially we like to talk about the timeline because it's so important in this case. And we also like to talk, podcasters like to talk about cell phone towers. I'm not going to be talking about cell phone towers. I'm not going to be talking about other suspects. I am going to talk about how Sarah Koenig fooled you all. Okay? And I'm going to look at, first we're going to look like, why would Sarah Koenig want to fool us at all? Why would she want to twist the evidence towards innocence? And I'd like to start by asking my listeners this one question. How many right guy was convicted podcasts or documentaries do you know that have been commercially or critically successful? And what I mean by that is, how many podcasts or documentaries have you watched where they say that this person, the subject of the documentary or podcast, committed the crime, was rightfully convicted, and is now serving the time that they deserve? And I think you're going to come up with the answer 0. 0. There may have been some podcasts or documentaries, but they are not raking in money, they aren't raking in critical acclaim, and they certainly aren't giving anybody a Peabody Award. So, it's part of the genre to create doubt, to have us wonder if this convicted killer is perhaps innocent. And they do that at the expense of the victim, and in this case, Hae Min Lee. And if you were Sarah Koenig, you might think, well, Adnan Syed has served quite a few years behind prison. He went in 2000. It's 2017 now. Served 17 years. At the time she made the podcast, it was maybe 15 years. That's a long time for someone to be convicted of murder to do. Maybe it isn't such a big deal if my podcast frees him. He did serve some time. He was punished. And there is always a chance. Maybe she has to... I believe that Sarah Koenig knows that the chance that Adnan Syed did not do this crime is so slim. Her whole cri de coeur, I nurse doubt, really rings hollow with me. I don't think she nurses that much doubt. And when she put in her coworker Dana saying, "What are the chances?" I think that is her own admission that the chances that all these facts would go in Adnan Syed's against his favor, that everything would go wrong that day, and it is against him, and he had nothing to do with this murder, is very slim. Okay? So, secondly, I want to talk about alibis. Now, alibis are the number one thing that someone can have to prove their innocence. It is the most important thing. If the police comes to ask you some questions or you become a suspect in an investigation, you have an ironclad alibi, you're off the list. You're clear. Because the idea that one person can't be in two places at once is just the simplest, cleanest way to prove that you did not do a crime. The way that Sarah Koenig handles the fact that Adnan Syed has no alibi is absolutely ridiculous. It's an insult to her listeners' intelligence. Sarah Koenig's answer to this is that it's normal for people to forget what they were doing. What were you doing 3 weeks ago? Can you even remember? Do you remember what you were doing 1999 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? But her listeners weren't accused of killing their ex-girlfriend or boyfriend. And it is not, they were not asked the day after, 3 weeks after, shortly after. And as an exercise, I'll have you think about, at your jobs, if you were docked a day's pay, if your employer said to you, you didn't show up for work that day, we're going to dock you that pay. Your mind would start spinning in all the ways that you could prove that you worked that day. If a couple $100, I don't know, whatever you're getting paid for the day is, was on the line, you would come up with some ways you could prove that you worked. Adnan Syed, his freedom is on the line, and he doesn't know what he was doing. He can't remember. And the fact that he can't remember is very clever, because he wants to leave his defense open, right? He wants to leave the timeline open so that if something comes up, if they can poke some holes like they're poking or they're trying to poke with a cell tower ping, then he has one way to go. He doesn't want to limit his options, right? For anybody who's seen the movie Reversal of Fortune, there's a famous scene where Alan Dershowitz says to his to Klaus von Bülow, "Don't tell me the truth, because that limits my options," right? In this case, this isn't the truth for Adnan Syed. The truth was he was murdering Hae Min Lee, taking her body to the park and burying her, okay? That is my opinion. And that's also the opinion of the jury, and that's why he's doing the time. And it's a real insult to our intelligence to start the podcast that way, like this was some ordinary day, right? And Adnan Syed is us. There's no difference. And it starts a very close psychological association with a convicted murderer that I will discuss later. Thirdly, I want to talk about domestic partner violence and how someone who shows up where they're not wanted, who can't accept a breakup, who doesn't listen to their ex-partner's wishes, is more likely to murder them. And you may say that that is a big leap from showing up with a cupcake or a piece of carrot cake or whatever Adnan Syed did, and a teenager not accepting a breakup and murder. But I want you to look into a book called The Gift of Fear. Now, I was trained by Gavin DeBecker's staff in a low-level security job I did for a high-level person. And if you read The Gift of Fear, what Gavin DeBecker did was he created a system that flags behavior that leads to violence. Tearing up someone's picture is one of them. showing up at their apartment, stalking behavior is more likely to lead to violence than non-stalking behavior. And that is, if you look at OJ and the way that he behaved before the murder, right? Those are some of the signs. It was likely that a person like him was going to commit murder with his behavior profile. So, Adnan Syed, when you look at Hae Min Lee telling her teacher, hide me, I am afraid of him, I want to think I'm not here. Right? The fear itself is telling. Secondly, the letter she wrote him saying, you're not accepting this breakup. People break up all the time. You know what he wrote on that note? I'm going to kill. Sarah Koenig says that's just a cheesy thing that you'd find in some detective novel. Ha ha ha. So she just lets us not really take that in and throw it out as inconsequential. Do you see what she's doing? She's managing things by minimization. She's also letting us identify with the convicted murderer from the beginning, right? So she said, what would you do? Do you remember where you were? Like, Adnan Syed had to remember where he was. And we have to trust Adnan Syed's word because he has now developed this personality trait where he has to prove everything that he says because he was not believed when he was telling the truth. He showed that you could make, I think it's freaking barbecue sauce out of ketchup or something like that, right? In prison because he wasn't believed. So he had to show his prison mates how you made it because now his word is very important to him. So she's saying this is the type of person that we should believe. And what if it happened to you? She doesn't ask us to identify with Hae Min Lee. What if you happened to have a boyfriend who didn't listen to you, didn't accept a breakup, who scared you, who ended up murdering you, and ended up having a podcast created where everybody believes he's innocent and makes him a martyr? Brings up the whole pain for the family. What if you're dead and you can no longer speak for yourself and you become a non-issue? Your murderer becomes the victim all over social media and in American culture. He's now the victim, not Hae Min Lee. Adnan Syed's now the victim. So there is a close association when Sarah Koenig is calling Adnan Syed saying, I think you're a really nice guy. She's asking us to feel the same way, right? Sarah Koenig thinks he's a nice guy, and she's talking to him a lot more than us listeners, right? She's looked into this case a lot more closely than her listeners might have, right? So we should trust her. It's a very clever way to steer you away from the obvious in this case. And the obvious is Adnan Syed murdered Hae Min Lee. And this is a disgusting money, fame grab. And Sarah Koenig, how she can live with herself, I don't know. I don't know how she's making podcasts with the blood of Hae Min Lee all over her hands. Thirdly or fourthly, I think, and you have to bear with me, I'm not a professional podcaster, I'm just someone with some opinions who follows true crime cases, who feels very frustrated that my viewpoint isn't being expressed. If you look at what happened to the Intercept staff who wanted to look at the other side of Serial, right? How did Adnan Syed get convicted if it was so unfair, if there really wasn't enough evidence to convict him? And that's something people, I think, who really know better, who know that the evidence is quite damning, really deep down say, well, there wasn't enough evidence to convict him, or legally he's innocent. The way we know that there was enough evidence to convict him is he was convicted. Okay? And I want you to look at a cell phone tower case. Unfortunately, the accused never went to trial because she killed herself and her young baby before she ever had to face the consequences for her actions. I want you to look at a different documentary called Dear Zachary. And in that case, the accused, a doctor, some of the most damning evidence against her were cell phone tower pings of her traveling across the country in her car when she said she was in bed homesick. No one watching that Dear Zachary documentary is questioning the cell phone tower evidence. So I want you to ask yourself why we are questioning it in Adnan Syed's case. And I will give you a very short answer, which is Dear Zachary was made by the best friend of the victim. And Serial was made by an ambitious journalist who never knew the victim and did everything she could to minimize her. Never really explored who she was, right? You got to ask yourself why. Why did Sarah Koenig never explore who Hae Min Lee was, really, fully? Why didn't she even give a whole episode to talking about Hae Min Lee, the victim? What did she get? Maybe 5-10 minutes? One or two friends describing her? Really, really despicable, in my opinion. So those are things that I want you to think about. I want you to look at the way the Intercept staff was treated when they came forward with the truth. Look at the way Canadian journalist Anne Brocklehurst has been treated. Anyone who says the truth about Adnan Syed is put down, silenced, ridiculed. Anyone who says Adnan Syed is innocent, boy, their careers improve. They get promoted. We see quite a bit of them, and I want you to think about why that is. So I hope you enjoyed the ways in which I explored the way Serial manipulated you. And if you think Adnan Syed didn't have anything to do with Hae Min Lee's murder, you've been fooled.